I'm about to right now. It's actually recording right now. All right, guys, let's go ahead and jump into our next lesson in photosynthesis. So, excuse my handwritten warm-up today. Where do the light and the dark reactions occur? Okay, in photosynthesis. So the light reactions happen in the thylakoid. Okay, that's the little pancake-like structures, okay, that stack together in grana in the chloroplast. And the dark reactions occur outside in the open space in the chloroplast, which is called the stroma. Okay, that's really important. The second question, what are the reactants and the products of each? So the light reaction takes in water and releases O2. It also releases ATP and NADPH. It also is technically going to take in ADP and NAD plus. Okay. The dark reactions, they take in CO2 and release sugars, CH2O, okay, for sugars. And then technically, they also take in ATP and NADPH and release ADP and NAD plus. Okay? So you will see that these two are kind of feeding opposite there. Okay? What the light reaction builds, the dark reaction breaks down and feeds back into the light reaction. So that's important. Okay? So we are going to look at the light reaction in a little bit more detail today. So remember, all of the energy is coming from light, coming from sunlight. And so this sunlight we are trying to harness this energy. Plants are trying to harness the energy of the sun and capture it in a form that plants can use. Just like in cellular respiration, we are trying to capture the glucose molecule into ATP, a form that the organism can use. Okay? Plants can't use sunlight energy, just like our cells can't use glucose energy. Plant cells need ATP as their energy, and so they have to convert that. And so the way that they do that is through the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll is really the part that's involved in helping to be able to capture the light. The chlorophyll, is the pigment that absorbs the light. And so it absorbs light, or it absorbs energy in photons. I'm not sure if you've heard of this word before. It's kind of like a physicsy word, but photons are packets of light. It's how light energy is quantized, I guess. I don't even know if that's a real word, but that's the quantity of light. It's in a packet called a photon. And so that's what the plant is absorbing with their pigments, such as chlorophyll. Now, there's a couple different types of chlorophyll. We've got chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and then another pigment called carotenoids. Now, there's several other accessory pigments, but these are the major three primary pigments. And they absorb at different wavelengths. So you may be familiar with this. We talked about this a little bit in biochemistry last year. But the electromagnetic spectrum. So I'm sure you've all heard of Roy G. Biv on the electromagnetic spectrum in the visible light part of the spectrum. And so different colors have different wavelengths. So the visible light wavelengths are between 400 and 750 nanometers. So the purple is on the shorter wavelength side with 400 nanometers. The red is on the longer wavelength side with 700 nanometers. And so different pigments absorb at different wavelengths of visible light. And so we can measure that absorption with a spectrophotometer to see how much light and what types and colors of light that the plants are absorbing. That can be measured with a spectrophotometer. And what we'll see is an absorption spectrum. And so if you look here, you see chlorophyll A, that's kind of a blue-green pigment. Chlorophyll B is more of like an olive-green pigment, and then carotenoids are kind of that yellow-orange pigment that you see there. So chlorophyll B absorbs best right here, which is going to be like about 475-ish nanometers, okay? Chlorophyll A is going to absorb best right here, which is going to be, maybe 430 or so nanometers. The carotenoids are going to have their best absorption here, but then you also have some more absorption from these chlorophylls at the higher wavelengths. Notice where you have the least amount of absorption is right here. And that's interesting. That's the green and yellow colors, that's what we think of plants being. Plants are green, right? But what happens in color is things are the color that they reflect, okay? So right now I'm wearing a red shirt. So that means my shirt reflects red light, okay? It absorbs all of the other colors, but it reflects red. So if plants are green, that means that they're going to absorb other colors, but they are going to reflect green light. So if you had a light and you put a filter over it, if you took a lamp and you were growing plants under it, or if you made a greenhouse and you were growing plants in it, and you put a filter that was green over that light, your plants wouldn't grow. Those plants would do the poorest, okay? Versus if you put a filter that was in the blue-purple range, those would do the best, okay? Followed by plants that had a red filter. So this is an action spectrum. So in this action spectrum, scientists put these colors over the lamps and they measure the rate of photosynthesis, which is measured by how much oxygen is released. And what they saw is the highest rates of photosynthesis were seen up here at those wavelengths of light in the purple-blue colors, and then second down here in the red-orange colors with the higher wavelengths. Very little photosynthesis was shown here. Okay, and then in this diagram over here, we just see the light being absorbed by the thylakoids in the chloroplast. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the specifics. So again, we are talking about the light reactions today. So the light reactions, which happen in the thylakoids, this here is the thylakoid membrane. So it's very similar in structure to the cell membrane. It's a lipid bilayer, right? And so we have in the thylakoid membrane these things called photosystems. Now there are two photosystems, photosystem 2 and photosystem 1, okay? And I wrote them like that. You're like, Miss Brown, why don't you just call them 1 and 2? Because they go backwards in order, okay? So electrons are passed. They're first received by photosystem 2, and then they're passed to photosystem 1. And you're like, that makes no sense. Why would they do that? Well, photosystem 2, though it happens first, photosystem 1, though it happens second, was discovered first, okay? And then this one, photosystem 2, though it happens first, was only discovered later. And so they're numbered in order of their discovery, not in order of the way that they occur, okay? The order in which they occur. So what is a photosystem? A photosystem is it contains a light harvesting complex. It contains a reaction center complex. And so it's a protein embedded in the cell membrane. and it helps to absorb these photons of light. So when the sunlight strikes the plants in the thylakoid, the green part of the plant in the chloroplast, the sunlight excites these pigment molecules. These are our chlorophyll, our pigment molecules. See them over here too. The sunlight excites these pigment molecules, and it excites the electrons. And so these pigment molecules pass these electrons like a hot potato. Okay? You got a hot potato and you're trying to pass it. You're trying to get rid of it. And ultimately, it's going to go to an electron acceptor. Okay? So the photons excite these pigment molecules and they start passing their electrons. Okay? And it goes to a special pair of chlorophyll molecules here. You don't really need to know that much about it. But ultimately, it is passed to a primary electron acceptor in this reaction center complex. Okay? And again, this is happening in the thylakoid membrane. This is photosystem 2. That's happening first. Now, down here at the bottom, it's given you photosystem 2 is sometimes referred to as P680, and photosystem 1 is called P700. That's those numbers represent the wavelength of light where they best absorb light. So PS2 is going to best absorb at 680 nanometers, and then P700 best absorbs at 700 nanometers. Okay, so that's what those numbers represent there. But again, we are trying to harvest this energy in the form of photons from the sun. So as these electrons get excited, we are capturing that energy and passing it on to the primary electron acceptor. Okay? So let's go on. This is kind of the same thing I just said, only in word form. So I'm going to walk through it in word form. So the photon of light is absorbed by pigment molecules. Those pigment molecules are like our chlorophylls, okay, and carotenoids or any other accessory pigments. In photosystem 2, which excites the electrons. These excited electrons then get passed along the pigment molecules to the reaction center complex, that was this light purple part in the middle, and then ultimately to the primary electron acceptor. That's what we just said. Okay, now a second part that we didn't talk about is that water is split. Okay, so the energy from the light also causes water to be split. So remember, we looked at this diagram yesterday. Water was one of the reactants here. And so that light causes the water in the plants to be split. And so when water is split apart, you're going to get 2 hydrogens, you're going to get 1 oxygen, and you're going to get 2 electrons. Okay? So here's where your oxygen comes out right here. It pairs up, so this is O2, and right here we only have O1. So it has to pair up with another O1 from a previous water split. Okay? These electrons are going to get picked up by NADP to form NADPH, okay? And these hydrogen ions are going to be used by the electron transport chain to form ATP. Now, remember the electron transport chain that we did in cellular respiration. We have a very, very similar electron transport chain that we're working with here, okay? So, water molecule is split into 2 electrons, 2 hydrogens, and an oxygen. The electrons are transferred back to P680. Hydrogen is released. Oxygen combines with another oxygen to release O2, as we just mentioned, okay? So, the excited electrons that are released from the water, let me go back to my diagram over here, sorry. These excited electrons are going to be passed along with the other electrons to the pigment molecules and to the primary electron acceptor right here, okay? Now, the electrons are passed from the primary electron acceptor in PS2 down the electron transport chain to PS1, Okay, so the flow of this, if we're talking about stages, like we have the steps in cellular respiration, our steps in photosynthesis are this, okay? PS2, electron transport chain, PS1, and another electron transport chain. That's how the energy moves. That's how we break this down, okay? So the electrons are transferred from the primary electron acceptor in PS2 down the electron transport chain right here to PS1 right here. And then as they move through the electron transport chain, ATP is generated, okay? Using that same ATP synthase like we had in cellular respiration, okay? Using chemiosmosis, building up that concentration gradient to drive the synthesis of ATP from ADP, okay? And again, this is photophosphorylation. All right. Now, let's move on to PS1, okay? PS1 is also absorbing light, so it's also got electrons that are transferred and have been passed, sorry, not foul language, my bad, onto the other electron transporter, leaving P700 without electrons. So let me go to it. I think I have a diagram of this. Yes. Okay. So we have both of our photosystems here, photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Both of them have electrons, water has been split, giving us excited electrons. The light is also going to excite the chlorophyll molecules, and they're going to pass these electrons. Both of them are getting electrons that are being passed to the primary electron acceptor. Those primary electron acceptors are going to pass those electrons down the electron transport chain. We have a cytochrome complex very similar to the way that we had in cellular respiration to generate ATP. Okay? Now, these electrons are going to be passed onto this chlorophyll molecule, P700, which is going to pass it up to its primary electron acceptor. Okay? Then these electrons are going to be passed down this electron transport chain. So this is the second round of the electron transport chain. And ultimately going to NADP reductase, where NADP is going to pick up those electrons and use them to make NADPH. Okay? And so this is all of the light reaction. You see that all of these steps happening. Sorry, I have to go back so many slides. Making our ATP in the first round of the electron transport chain, making our NADPH in the second round of the electron transport chain. Okay, ETC1 and ETC2. All right, NADPH is not made in ETC1. ATP is not made in ETC2. Okay, those are exclusive. Electron transport chain makes one makes ATP. Electron transport chain 2 makes NADPH. All right. Water is split, producing oxygen, and the light is absorbed. All happening in the thylakoid. All right. So let's go back here. I think I've got one more slide of words to walk back through this one more time. Okay. So excited electrons are passed from the primary electron acceptor of PS1 through a second electron transport chain. Okay. The electrons move through a protein called ferredoxin. Yeah, I don't really care if you know about ferredoxin. To NADP reductase, where they are accepted by NADPH. You may really wish to reword that because they're really accepted by NADP plus to make NADPH. I think you all understand that concept. Okay, so I've kind of That may be worded a little funny. But they're really accepted by NADP plus to make NADPH, if you want to clarify that in your notes. Okay, so this is storing the energy into a form that can be transferred to the Calvin cycle. Okay, and again, this part's important. No ATP is generated in that second round of the electron transport chain. Okay, no ATP generated there. All right, I think that wraps this unit up. Realize just these electrons that were accepted here are ultimately getting passed here. It's the same electrons that move through this chain and go here, which are going up to the primary electron acceptor. Okay, it's just a continuing passing of electrons to be able to harness that energy into ATP and NADPH, which are both going to be used by the Calvin cycle. All right. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, then you all have a great day and have a great weekend, and I will talk to you on Monday. Bye.